Hello, geography students. Mr. Clark with another video to finish up the notes in this group of slides on development. And so this is where we left off from, what's today, Thursday? From Tuesday, we left off with this slide. And to do a quick recap, what we looked at in Tuesday's video is A, how countries become developed, B, how to classify various countries in the world based on levels of development, and C, what those variables or statistics mean. So some of the things that we looked at on Tuesday, we looked at gross national income per person, essentially the average income that people make. We talked about how this can be a little misleading at times because countries that have smaller populations tend to have higher incomes per person. We also looked at another economic statistic known as gross domestic product. So, gross domestic product is how much goods and services your country produces at the prices they produce. Both gross national income per person and gross domestic product are economic variables or statistics. Economic meaning production and money and finance. So, economic variables are one way of gauging the level of development in a country. Another gauge to determine the level of development in a country would be healthcare statistics or health variables. So we looked at the amount of doctors available, the amount of nursing beds available, the amount of medicine available within a country. And what we did with that is we looked at if a country has more doctors and a higher quality of healthcare and more available health insurance, then that leads to what? It leads to longer life expectancies. It leads to fewer babies dying in childbirth. It leads to fewer crude deaths per 1,000 people in a population. All right? And then we ended with this information about education, showing that these developing countries, the countries that are more towards the bottom of world development rankings, tend to have schools that are underfunded, crowded, do not have the resources or technologies that schools in developed countries such as Europe and North America have, which leads to smaller percentages of your population being able to read and write, which is the literacy rate. The literacy rate is a key statistic that's analyzed by geographers to determine how developed a country is. So what I want you to think about right now is if a country has a low literacy rate, if you were one of the leaders of a country and you're looking at your literacy rates, and let's say only 50 to 55% of your population can read and write. Why would you be concerned about that? So think about that for a second. So you should be concerned because in the future, this means that fewer people can read and write, which means that over time, those people do not have the skills and talents to produce high quality equipment, to be teachers, to be doctors, to be lawyers. Think about it. Think about some of the jobs that you guys want to pursue when you're older. You know, many of you that are watching this video right now, maybe you want to be doctors, lawyers, teachers, police officers, firefighters, bankers, work in finance or business. Think about all the careers that I just listed. Even in trades, if you want to be a carpenter or a plumber, you have to be able to read and write. So if you can't read and write, if you can't perform basic math and arithmetic and read directions and type on a computer, your country is going to be mainly just farmers or people working in manual labor jobs. And for that, that means that you're not going to be getting paid a high amount of money. Your country's not going to develop over time. So education is a key statistic that can lead to development. It's one of the reasons, you know, we have a presidential election coming up in November, and I guarantee you one of the things, one of the topics that's going to be hotly debated is education. How much spending should the federal government and state governments put into education? What's the direction of education? Education is a highly talked about political topic too. Why? Because it's an essential component of a country becoming more developed. All right? So make sure you know the role of education. Okay. If you looked here, We got a few different colors here. Sierra Leone, a country in Western Africa, home to a lot of diamond and gold mines. Sierra Leone's in like this whitish gray color. Look at their school enrollment. Only about 30% of their total population was enrolled in school. If you over here, what does that translate to? A very subpar literacy rate. Like compare Sierra Leone's literacy rate here, about almost 40%. So that means 4 out of every 10 people can read and write basic sentences by the age of 15. Compare that to Russia, to Japan, even to China or Canada. The United States isn't in here, but the United States is near at the top in these statistics as well. I think the United States literacy rate is around like 94, 95%, if not higher. So if you're the country of Sierra Leone, this is troubling to you because if your people aren't educated, that really hinders or limits how developed your country can become in the future too. Because you're talking about future generations here. You're talking about kids that are 5, 10 years old that haven't even hit adulthood yet. And if they're going to hit adulthood in the next 10 to 20 years and they can't read and write, that means your development is going to be limited for at least another generation. So before we get to this, so I don't want to just throw statistics at you too. One of the things that you should think about here is what can be done to promote education in a Sierra Leone, in a look at India, in a China where the literacy rate is lower than that of other countries, in an India. What if you were, if you were in charge of these countries? What would be some solutions that you would propose to try and educate people more, to push that literacy rate up, to lead to higher development in a country? That's something we'll talk about in the group chat today. Okay. With the economy, I already mentioned economics. Think of like production, finance, trade, money. In developed countries, a country that's developed, such as the United States, such as Japan, such as Australia, France, Germany, they have modern use of technology. They use a lot of natural resources, and by that I mean oil, steel, wood, hydroelectric power. They trade. They make things here, and they trade for things that they're not as good at. So here's an example. The United States is very skilled at making computer software, producing banking services, and aviation equipment. Equipment to make planes and to fly planes. So let's just focus on those 3 things: banking, aviation, and what's the first thing I said? Computer software. So if the United States wanted to, they could make video games and shirts and t-shirts and shoes. They could do those things. But they're better off using their highly educated people to make computer software and banking services and airline equipment. So what they're going to do is they're going to make those 3 things: computer software, banking services, airline equipment. They're going to trade those. They're going to sell them to Vietnam, to Laos, to Kenya. And in return, they're going to buy things from Kenya. They're going to buy video games. They're going to buy TVs. They're going to buy smartphones or the components to make smartphones. They're going to buy shirts and t-shirts. Guys, this is how trade works. The economy we live in today is very different from the economy that we lived in about 100 years ago because of globalization. Our world is so connected today that countries are allowed to focus on what they do best. Like, for example, Vietnam is really good. They have a really industrialized workforce that isn't the most educated. So they make a lot of textiles, shirts, shoes, electronics. And what they do is then they sell those to countries that need them. Countries like France, like the United States. The global economy we live in today allows countries to trade. It allows countries to focus on what they do best and trade for things that they need. It's one of the main reasons why so many of the phones, the video games that you play, the computers that you're on right now aren't made here. They're made elsewhere. But the skills needed to make those phones are taught here. are developed here. The software, the programming, that's all developed here. So it's a cool concept to think about. The world is so big, but we're so interconnected today through trade and our economy that we really have a lot of common ties with people who are hundreds of thousands of miles away. All right, so that's enough on trade for right now. Developing countries, some things to think about. The things that they trade tend to be lower priced. You know, your shirts and shoes and video games compared to like computer software and banking. They either lack natural resources. It's not always true. Like a lot of these countries have a good amount of resources. They may not be as educated on how to use the resources. A corrupt government might not use the resources efficiently. They don't have as much technology, and they have some of these things. These should look familiar here. They produce fewer valued goods and services, and their national income per person is less because a lot of them are farmers or performing manual labor jobs. Okay, these are some of the things it leads to. Leave. We're towards the end here. So what does this all lead to? If you took these economic statistics, these education statistics, standard of literacy rate, sorry, and health statistics about doctors and healthcare and life expectancy, countries that have better education, a better functioning economy, meaning like a higher GDP, higher income per person, and more doctors, longer life expectancies would fall into this category here on the left. The standard of living is higher. People are living longer. People have more money to spend, which leads to more businesses. Think about it. The more money in an economy, the more jobs in an economy, the more businesses that there are, the better your economy is. Which people are going to be happier. People are going to spend more money. They can pay for health care. They can pay for health insurance. They can travel. So, which leads to lower death rates and fewer kids dying in childbirth. But if your country has a lower standard of living, this means people are upset. People are performing more farming and manual labor jobs. The government might be corrupt. There might be civil war. What does that lead to? A devastated economy. Economy that's run down, that cannot provide health care or health insurance for all of its people. An economy that cannot build roads and bridges and airports and ports that are necessary for trade and to bring in new jobs, which leads to higher crime rates, higher poverty rates, people living shorter lives, and higher death rates. Okay? This is something to look at too. A term you need to understand here is contraception. Contraception is birth control. So birth control limits the amount of babies that can be born. Everybody knows like the various types of birth control, or if you haven't, you will learn about them in health class. And if you look, the blue here is the percentage of married women using contraception. Okay? Um, just look at Norway, for example. Now, this is a little hard to read. Over 60% of women in Norway use contraception, use birth control, meaning that they severely limit how many babies are being born. Look at the connection here between the average income per person and birth control, meaning that in countries that have a lower percentage of women who use birth control, the average income is lower. But in countries like the United States, that was weird, uh, where 73% of all women between the age of 15 and 45 use birth control, the average income is higher. So the point I'm trying to make here, guys, is the more available healthcare there is, this limits family size, which in most cases is good because if you limit family size, limit the amount of children being born, you have less expenditures as a family. Women are more empowered to go out and work and contribute to the workforce, which leads to a higher gross national income. All right, so we're going to end here. So In conclusion, we've learned about economic statistics, GDP, gross national income per person, health statistics, doctors,
Imagine learning, okay?
health insurance,
10 minutes left, so you're gonna do imagine.
and standard of living. And why can I not think of the last one? Oh my goodness. Economic education, education, literacy rate. So as you wrap up this video today, I don't want you just to be consumed by the various statistics that you learned about. I want you to start brainstorming, how does a country move from, let me see if I can pull up, how does a country move from underdeveloped, such as Sudan, to becoming developed? How does a country move from an LDC like Mexico to an MDC, a more developed country like the United States? That's something we'll talk about today in the Google chat, and we'll expand upon that next time. All right? Hope you enjoyed the video. Talk to you soon.